Good afternoon, everyone. Let us wait a couple of minutes until everyone is able to connect. Okay, so from what I see here, we have most of the participants now having joined the session, and so let us then proceed without any further delay. My name is Dimitris Vartis. I'm from the European Commission, from DG Move, and we're here now in this session to talk about the new Green Deal call under Horizon 2020, and in particular, the actions that we're putting forward under Area 5 for sustainable and smart mobility. So let us go through this now. You will see here at the top of the first slide the full title of the topic that we're putting forward under Green Deal call Area number 5 for sustainable smart mobility, and you can see the title there: Green Airports and Ports as multimodal hubs for sustainable and smart mobility. And the way we're going to structure this session is we're going to do that in two parts. In part one, we are going to have this presentation, a high-level overview of the topic, and then for the second part thereafter, we're happy to enter into a Q&A session. We'll try to provide any clarifications or answers there for the benefit of all. Now, as an introduction to this topic, let us first look at the policy context. In the Green Deal communication back in December 2019, indeed there was a clear message that transport should become drastically less polluting. And there were specific references in terms of accelerating the shift to sustainable and smart mobility, ramping up the production and deployment of sustainable alternative fuels. But there were also very specific references for the need to reduce emissions for airports and ports, also as a means to reduce emissions for the aviation sector, for shipping, but also for other modes of transport. Then if we look into more detail at the various sectors in transport, I think we can all appreciate indeed the significant progress that has already been achieved in road and rail, for instance, in the area of electrification. But indeed, in aviation and shipping, much more needs to be done in this area. And with those sectors accounting roughly around 27% of total European Union transport greenhouse gas emissions, with rising traffics, and especially for the waterborne transport, a large share of the overall global trade. Indeed, these are very important sectors and in urgent need of lowering emissions and decarbonizing in the coming years. At the same time, there are a number of policy initiatives also to accompany our efforts in this area, and there will be even further policy action coming up in the coming years. And indeed, we're looking for impact to be achieved in an immediate time frame by 2025 already, and by 2030. And we have all seen the latest formal ambition that has been communicated also in the State of the Union by President von der Leyen to reduce by 55% at least the emissions by 2030 and achieve climate neutrality by 2050. So on the road, on the way to all these actions to reduce the emissions, and from the side of research and innovation, indeed, from our perspective, it was rather sensible to have a topic here as part of the Green Deal call, focusing on green airports and ports as multimodal hubs for sustainable and smart mobility. Now, if we look a little bit more into the detail as to the targeted impacts that we're looking at from this topic, you will see here on the slide, and it's also quite laid out in the call text. We're looking for projects to help accelerate the deployment of sustainable alternative fuels. We mentioned some examples on the side of biofuels, green hydrogen, but also on the side of electricity and electromobility for aviation, shipping, but also for the other transport modes. In parallel, we would like to have a ramp up in the production, distribution, and supply of all these fuels and clean energy sources, all the way delivered to the refueling and the recharging capabilities for different types of vehicles and purposes. So indeed, all the way from the supply side to the demand side and the point of use. As we move forward, in terms of the medium-term to longer-term impact, essentially we're putting down the ambition to focus and aim for having zero-emission ports and airports operations with improved air quality already by 2030. Now, this means also significantly reducing the emissions in the aviation sector, as I mentioned, in shipping, but also for all the other modes. So for the entire transport system, and that refers also to passenger flows as well as freight flows. At the same time, we're looking for the projects and these actions to lead to more energy efficient and smart operations, as well as greener buildings, smart logistics, and having more efficient intermodal connections and effective modal shifts. And finally there, as airports are in the close vicinity of cities and ports, many ports are actually situated within cities, we're looking also to have an impact at the level of reducing emissions for these cities and improving the links, the access from the city to the city, from airports and ports. So indeed, lower emissions there and improved urban mobility and interconnection between the node cities and these hubs. Let us now look at the proposed activities, so the core of the scope of work that is being proposed here in this topic. Indeed, the first point there is, I would say, the overarching point that we should all have in mind there. The focus here is to embark on large-scale, real-life, high TRL demonstrations for green airports and green ports, maritime and inland. High TRL levels, we essentially mean 6 or above. So we're looking for innovative solutions, new ideas coming out, results that should immediately then proceed to mature pre-deployment and deployment as we move forward. At the same time, we're looking for pilot and demonstration activities on the production side of zero-emission energy, once again, including the distribution and the supply of all of that to the end and the point of use at the airports and the ports. In terms of the fuels, we list the examples here on the side of electricity, green hydrogen, and other types of fuels, biofuels, and other sustainable fuels. Let us then also look at some of the other aspects that are being addressed in this topic. So even though fuels and these demonstration activities are the central core of that, the topic also addresses certain other elements, and in particular, the link with green and smart operations and logistics, as well as other activities on the side of construction, dredging in the side of waterborne, improved infrastructures, and having effective and green land, sea, and river use. In terms of digitalization, these are also certain aspects that are also going to be contributing to generating impact to this topic. And here we talk about new smart and digital tools for the optimization of traffic, for instance, between airports and between ports and between the city and the traffic flows. But also to leverage other technologies which are already available there. On the side of the EU, of course, we have satellite-based solutions. The use of Galileo and Copernicus could be leveraged to that end. So indeed, on top of the clean energy sustainability component, here there is also a digitalization and smart mobility component here that we're overlaying on top, because clearly that will also have a positive impact on reducing emissions. And finally, the topic is also looking at the non-technological aspects that should also be considered as we move forward, and in particular, all the relevant framework conditions that should be in place, developing new governance models, and looking also at the investment cost side of things, so that these innovative solutions could actually start being placed on the ground and rolled out on a bigger scale all over Europe. On this slide, let us pause for 1 second again to review what we have said until now. I'm listing here essentially the key features for green airports and ports, and the key buckets in the scope of work of this topic. Right at the top there, we have the sustainability component. So the focus there is on green energy production, distribution, and supply, the use of that clean energy for transport, but also for other purposes. And in terms of fuels and energy sources, we talk about a number of possibilities here. Hydrogen, electricity, biofuels, and other types of sustainable fuels are all within the scope of the topic. The second important building block or bucket in the topic here is the smart and digitalization component. And here we're also looking for participation and contribution in demonstration activities of connected and automated vehicles, cranes, or other vehicles that are situated in these hubs, as well as other digital traffic, smart traffic optimization mechanisms to see how best to optimize traffic flowing into and out of the airport or the port, connecting with cities or other nodes, but also smart logistics and having efficient multimodal interconnections, modal shifts. The third element there, which I touched on just now, is actually what I call the aspect of multimodality. And indeed, in this topic, this is not just about aviation, it's just about shipping. It's also about road and rail. All the modes of transport are interconnecting or crossing these hubs, airports and ports. And so, indeed, this overall multimodal perspective is, again, overlaid on the entire topic. All modes of transport are within the scope. And indeed, we're putting forward a systemic perspective on having door-to-door efficient and multimodal mobility for both passengers and freight. And finally, the last big bucket or category there refers to other activities which are also within the scope of the topic. I mentioned the green logistics earlier, but also new types of infrastructures, improving the energy efficiency of buildings, establishing, improving the links with the cities, the interconnections, the access to the airports and the ports, as well as improving the urban environment, mobility, but also taking into account and improving in the areas of biodiversity, circular economy, and making sure that we are on the greening side there in terms of making the effective use of the land, the sea, or the river as is applicable. Now, on this slide, I want to give you a very high-level overview of some of the specific conditions which are included in the topic. And you will see that the topic comprises of two distinct sub-areas. Area A refers to green airports, and Area B refers to green ports. Each of those areas also has a number of specific conditions and indeed certain aspects of work to be covered. In the Area A for green airports, the topic, once again, is looking at real-life high TRL demonstrations to be performed, addressing all four headings. So transport, terminal, energy, as well as the cross-cutting aspects. On the side of the terminal, the topic foresees that all aspects A, B, and C should be covered, as well as at least 3 of the items described in the subsequent bullet points. On the side of the terminal and on the side of the energy, the topic there indicates that at least for each of these areas, for each of these components, at least 2 of the 4 bullet points should be covered. And finally, for the cross-cutting category, it's clearly laid out that at least 3 of the 7 items described in the bullet points should be covered. Now, for area B, for green ports, again, the same focus on real-life high TRL demonstrations of sustainable maritime and inland ports. The scope here is to address at least 6 aspects in total. In particular, bullet point number 1, which is the overarching and the biggest core, and the main thrust of the topic there, on the side of energy production, all the way distribution, supply, and the use of the clean energy sources and fuels, as well as 5 of the remaining 7 bullet points. So once again, at least 6 aspects to be addressed in area B for green ports. You will also see a specific condition there for green ports, that the consortia should also include at least 1 inland port. This is clearly an area that we also do not wish to disregard. Inland waterways are quite important also to be addressed. So that's why that specific condition is in place. And on this slide, Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay, perfect. I believe the technical issue appeared as I was entering this last slide, and so I suspect that no sound was essentially lost. But of course, as I mentioned, there will be a Q&A session thereafter. So I'm happy again to repeat a number of points or to clarify any questions you may have. Now on this slide, let me go through that rather quickly so that we don't have another technical issue. But indeed here, I'm summarizing indeed all the main modalities and the conditions relevant to this topic. As I mentioned, this is an innovation action. Once again, it's focusing on real life high level TRL demonstration. So that's why it makes sense that we embark on an innovation action. In terms of project duration, we're looking at projects having a lifetime of 4 to 5 years. As I mentioned in this topic, as for the entire Green Deal Core, we're looking for significant and immediate impact, having results in innovative solutions coming out of the projects rather quickly. So that's the time frame that we have there, essentially by 2025, to have impact there. In terms of the composition of the consortia, you will see in the specific conditions in the call text that either for green airports or for green ports, the consortia should include one leading lighthouse airport or port, as well as up to 3 fellow airports or ports, also to be associated in the project. On the side of the evaluation, indeed, as always, we will look at the highest ranking proposals, achieving the highest score, but in order to ensure a balanced portfolio of actions, we foresee at least 2 proposals to come forward from the area of green airports and another 2 from the area of green ports. In terms of the budget for this topic, we have earmarked a total of 100 million euros, which is a substantial amount, and that translates then at the level of the project, also in view of the activities that we foresee, a budget range of 15 to 25 million euros per project. And finally, in terms of the modalities of this call, please note that this is a single stage call, so it's a one-shot submission, and the call deadline, as specified there on the funding and tenders portal, the deadline is on the 26th of January 2021. So please make a note of that, and I invite you to proceed with your potential applications to this call. Thank you very much for your attention. Let me remind you also that you will find full information on this topic in the actual call text. All the conditions are laid out there. So once again, please refer to the text for all the relevant details and the conditions for application. Thank you. Now, let us proceed now with the Q&A session, and I see one participant who wishes to take the floor. Could the IT administrator please pass on the microphone to the colleague, Mr. Vasco Teles? Okay. Yes. Okay. There seems to be an issue there on the side of the voice, but then what I can do is I can go through the written questions that I see here. Possibly it is not possible to raise questions through voice, only through data, through text. So in that case,
If I could go then through some of the written questions here that I see on the list. Okay. Let me start. I see a question here, so that we don't delay any further. I see a question there on what is considered to be an inland port. Does it have to be in a specific distance from the sea, or perhaps out of tidal range, and so on? Now there, as a matter of fact, there is not a strict definition of an inland port, but clearly has to be alongside a waterway, an inland waterway. I would say, please also refer to the 10T regulation. There are also references there about ports, seaports, and inland ports. Okay. I see another question here. Is it possible to cooperate with more than 3 fellow ports? Now there, in the code text, there's a condition that there should be a maximum of 3 fellow ports associated to this project. There's a condition also that a maximum of 20% of the funding for this project should be directed for the fellow ports. So indeed, this is a maximum, it's a ceiling condition. And so, please take that into account. Having, for example, another 10 ports on board would create also, as you can understand, a number of difficulties in fulfilling the condition, but also in performing sufficiently all the actions that are foreseen in the topic. Indeed, to clarify also another question on the 20%, indeed, there's a right understanding there that the 20% maximum condition is for the fellow ports. So 1 minus that, the rest 80% then would be attributed and apportioned to the rest of the partners in the consortium. I take another question here concerning ports. There are various elements in the topic: terminal operation, transport in, out, land, sea, energy infrastructure, and supply use. What are the focus among the 3 aspects? Now here, as I mentioned, in the area of green ports, there's a list of activities. You can see that in the number of bullet points that we have laid out there in the text. However, not all of the elements must be necessarily addressed. As I mentioned, bullet point number 1 should be addressed, as well as another 5 further down. So a total of 6 aspects. So there again, we leave a little bit of flexibility, and would like to invite also proposals on focusing on different aspects and different combination of aspects to be addressed. So there, I would like not to give emphasis to emphasize one versus other topics or other areas. This is also for the consortium to put forward their proposal, and then we will of course assess, and the evaluators will assess, and it will become clear in the proposals which elements are being addressed and where the project is going to emphasize more. Is there any condition to be a lighthouse port, to be a core port of the 10T, for instance? Now there, once again, we did not put the restriction or the definition of what is the leading airport or the leading port. The question, by the way, here, it's not just for the ports, but also for the airports. So for the lighthouse as the leading hub, let's call it airport or port, the idea is that we have one which is taking on board the majority of the activities, the demonstration actions there, and I would say more of the lead in the different aspects of work to be addressed. Let me also clarify here. I don't see a question on that at this stage, but maybe it would come later. Let us clarify what is already in the text, that the lighthouse airport or the lighthouse port does not necessarily have to be also the project coordinator. This could be another partner. Okay, but once again, to come back to this question, is there any condition to be a lighthouse port? No, this is up to the consortium to propose which port would like to do that. Now, of course, presumably would make sense that the lighthouse or the leading port is rather larger rather than smaller in size, also in comparison to the fellow airports or ports. But once again, these conditions are not there. So I hope that that answers the question there. Okay, what kind of concrete activities can be related to biodiversity? Now, there, I mean, once again, this is an area which we did not want to prescribe in detail. We're looking forward to hear new ideas and innovative solutions which directly improve biodiversity or indirectly. Okay, so innovative solutions that the end result of those would indeed be a net positive impact for biodiversity. But once again, we did not wish to specify what exactly should be done in which area and so on. I hope that then gives you the flexibility to reflect on that and put forward sensible proposals. Can there be more than one lighthouse port or airport, followed by 3 other ports or airports each? So 8 in total. Okay, so again, let me clarify again what is in the text. The idea is in these consortia, in these projects, to have one, let's call it one leader, one lighthouse, airport, or one port. Okay, that lighthouse, airport, or port should take on board the majority of the actions, be the point of reference to develop, test, validate, and demonstrate concrete solutions to be developed. Okay, let's say that this lighthouse, port, or airport is the anchor of the activities. So there's one. There are not 2, and there are not 3 or 8. There's one lighthouse. Then to complement this one lighthouse, airport, or port, the topic allows for additional ports or airports to join the project as fellow airports or ports, to be associated to the activities, participate in the demonstration activities, but clearly they would not take on board the same volume and extent of activities as the lighthouse partner. So once again, I think the text is rather clear there. One port or airport will be the lighthouse partner, and up to 3, there could be 2, but up to 3 fellow or associated ports or airports should be included in the project. Another question here, could any demonstration activities also be performed in fellow airports and ports? Will the cost of demo activities in the fellow airports ports be reimbursed? Now, within the consortium and the different members that are participating there, different airports or different ports, and the other partners, and the topic also makes references to research institutes or consulting firms or other partners or stakeholders participating in this consortia. The topic does not prescribe in detail what exactly will be the precise work of the fellow airports and ports. The ambition is, of course, that these fellow airports and ports perform activities, if I can say, as close as possible, and with the funding which is provided in the project, but also from other sources, and private sources, from their own private source, to perform activities as necessary and as close as possible to those performed from the lighthouse. Now, clearly, this will not be possible to exactly replicate all the activities, but indeed they could take on board certain parts of the demonstration or perform similar types of demonstration at a much smaller scale. The key thing here in the text, as I mentioned earlier, is the budget cap of 20% budget for the fellow airports or ports. Within that budget envelope, it is not, again, prescribed how these fellow airport ports would use this budget for. But the text clearly says that the ambition is that these fellow airports and ports will play a clear role in generating also impact out of this project, and also showing clear commitment that the innovative solutions would be replicated also in these ports, and that they would also act as part of the first group of first movers to implement these innovative solutions all across Europe. So indeed, the fellow airport supports have a clear role to play, but again, we would not prescribe the precise activity that each of these stakeholders would do within the project. Now, for the intellectual property, there, let me refer you to the general rules of Horizon 2020. These are still Horizon 2020 calls, so the applicable clauses there on IPR and other aspects are also applicable to the Green Deal call. So I would refer you, please, to review those general annexes and the conditions for all the calls of Horizon 2020. There's another question here. How do we know which lead fellow airports will get funded? Or is it the consortium proposal and associated airports that get funded? What is the criteria of Lighthouse fellow port to be selected? I believe we covered that point there already. Essentially, it will be up to the consortium itself to define the different roles for the different partners, who would play the role of the anchor, the lighthouse port or airport, who would be a fellow port or airport. This is something that needs to be clearly laid out in the proposal. So we will not be saying that this partner should get that percentage, and that is part of the proposal that needs to be put forward. There's a question here on dry ports can be considered inland ports. I believe also we covered that a little bit earlier. As I mentioned, there is no strict definition of inland ports in the legislation. There are some reference, of course, in the 10T regulation, but okay, clearly these ports need to be situated along a waterway, an inland waterway. So to that end, as I said, there's no strict definition, and it would be up to the consortium to clearly indicate, because it is also a clear condition in the call text, clearly indicate which partner is part of the project undertaking the role of the inland port. From perspective of academia, could you comment, please, on how much room there is for research activities in this current call, Area 5? Yes, indeed. As you see also in the call text, there's reference to partners being an airport or a port, but there are also some examples provided of other partners that we look forward to also be part of the consortium. You see the scope of work is primarily focusing on high TRL demonstration activities, and so most of the work is on that side of the TRL scale. But having said that, these activities also need to be underpinned through relevant and associated research analysis and contributions from academia. So indeed, we see, or let me put it the other way around, potentially it would not be a comprehensive project if research partners are not included in these projects. So indeed, we see a range of stakeholders participating, so both industry, but also research and other stakeholders are quite key in this project. So yes, we do see a role for the contribution on the research side. Are there specifications about the size, number of passengers, flights of the airports acting as lighthouse? Also, similarly, the questions applying to the ports. Once again, there's no clear specification as to which airport or port would undertake the role of lighthouse. This is for the consortium to define that role, and for the stakeholder to come forward with that activity on the side of the lighthouse. Let me then see here, scroll down. Okay. Let me scroll down to see if there are any other questions. So here. Okay. Okay, now from perspective, yes. Now then, eligibility criteria for the consortium. Once again, there, please look at the specific conditions laid out in the text, as well as general annexes of Horizon 2020. All the eligibility criteria for participation are listed there. I mentioned one, which is listed in the cold text, and that is for the different airports or ports to be from different EU member states or associated countries. So the eligibility, you'll be able to take it from there. Anonymous. Okay, I believe that is covered on the side of the inland. Now, on the side of evaluations, does the at least two mean want to cover more points to get the best rate? Now, for the scoring of the proposals, the essence, there's a question here as to whether a proposal would get higher score if they cover more points. This is not necessarily the case. In fact, the text clearly lays out the condition and the flexibility that consortia have to put forward proposals covering, let's say, for the area of green ports, 6 of the 8. But if it's the first 6, or if it's the latter 6, or any other combination thereof, or if 7 are addressed, or if 8 are addressed, there is no preliminary advantage or disadvantage in either of these permutations. What is important is to, and it will be evaluated, and the various criteria apply here. Again, the context of H 2020 on the side of excellence, implementation, and impact. What is important to note is that all these criteria will be assessed. So if a project is on the very high end of the scale on all criteria, having addressed only 6 aspects, on the other hand, there's a project that addresses all the aspects, but not in an entirely comprehensive way. Clearly, that project could not receive a higher score. So I hope that answers the question. Once again, the conditions are laid out there, and the scoring is and the evaluations are performed as they always performed, have been performed in this MFF and in the course of H 2020. Another question here to clarify on the number of fellow ports. Is it good to have 3 fellow ports or airports, or fewer than 3 are possible? Yes, fewer than 3 are also possible. We give a ceiling, as I said, a maximum up to 3 fellow ports to be associated. Also, we can all understand we cannot put too many there because of the types of number of activities and things to be covered there. So that's why we put a little bit of a limit there. Let's limit up to 3. There can be 3, there can be 2. I think that is now answered. Okay, there was a question to clarify which bullet points to be addressed per area. There, I would point you back into the text, which clearly lays out the various parts to be addressed within its area, whether it's airports or ports. Please read that carefully, and I think it should be clear as to what is the scope, which bullet points are within the scope to be addressed. And for both areas, as I mentioned, there is a flexibility for the consortium to put forward ideas and proposals that cover different types of combinations of these points, these bullet points. International cooperation is encouraged in this topic. Yes, indeed. As always, again, in the context of Horizon 2020, this is a standard approach we're taking, that for all projects in H2020, we encourage also international cooperation. That could mean additional partners joining the consortium from outside the EU and outside of the associated countries that are eligible to participate. But there again, I mean, this is up to the consortium to define that. Once again, this is also, please see the word encourage. So by no means is it mandatory, and by no means will this be part of the evaluation process. It is encouraged, in particular due to the nature of the activities. We talk about traffic, we talk about hubs, big hubs, airports and ports that have clear connections on the international front. Is it correct that each port must be in a different country? Yes, the text there says that the airports or the ports should be from different EU member states or associated countries. So to give one example, if there are 3 fellow and 1 lighthouse, if there are 4 airports in total, all these 4 airports should not be from 1 EU member state. And why do we think this is important? As I mentioned, the ambition here is that the innovative solutions that are being put forward and demonstrated, they are also tested and demonstrated in various operating environments in different countries, so that will help to accelerate the follow-up deployment and rollout of these activities on a larger scale across different types, different sizes of airports and ports all over Europe and beyond. Does the call also cover urban air mobility topics? Now, these types of urban air mobility concepts and urban air mobility vehicles are not comprehensively addressed in the text. If my memory is correct, I think there's one example of drones which is being mentioned in the call text. But indeed, the point is that all types of vehicles that are in the presence of an airport, within an airport or a port, or interconnect, or have access there, these vehicles will also have access, should have access to new types of clean energy being produced and supplied from these hubs. So indeed, to the extent that an airport is also able to accommodate new types of air vehicles, urban vehicles, new types of drones from cities, to the extent they can also then be accommodated for landing and departures at airports, for refueling at airports, yes, they could also be within the scope. So indeed, there's no restriction. That could also be part of the scope. Is the recommended airport size to be part of the consortium large, medium, small? Now, here again, there's no explicit mention or condition on the size of airports or ports, as I mentioned. Now, clearly, I've laid out the ambition, I've laid out the expected impact that we foresee from these projects. If we have 1 + 2, which is 3, and all 3 being small, there is a certain type of impact which is being generated there. Now, ideally, we would like to have a mix of sizes, okay? Potentially smaller, medium, but large. Large also to be included because also a number of these activities are also more easily accommodated or undertaking in the course of the larger hubs. And as I mentioned earlier, the ambition thereafter is that these innovative solutions are rolled out all across Europe. And the ambition is not just to roll that out, once again, as an example, only to small airports. In order to achieve the impact of the Green Deal, we would like the different sizes, solutions tested for different sizes of airports or ports, and thereafter immediately also then to proceed with implementation at different sizes of airports and ports all over Europe. So I hope that answers the question. There are no clear criteria on the number of passengers or traffic there. Can you confirm the Lighthouse Airport will not have to be obligatorily the coordinator of the proposal? Yes, this is confirmed. That's why in the call text, it clearly says Consortia should include one lighthouse airport or port. So indeed, the port or the airport would be a different partner, and the coordinator could be another. There's a question here on the fellow airports here, which I believe I covered already. But the question here says that the call text is very vague and leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Could you please use examples to illustrate? So essentially, what is the scope of work of the fellow airports? If I take 1 second there to take the script in front of me. Okay, so now having in front of me the precise text, let me read the text here, which is in the call. 3 at most fellow airports or ports that will be actively associated in helping to define and incorporate their specificities in the more general approach and solutions, follow closely the demonstration actions, and are committed to implement the best practices identified and results produced by the project. So the text already makes clear references as to the scope of activities that can be undertaken by the fellow airport or fellow port. The text talks about concrete actions. The text talks about commitments. The text talks about closely following the demonstration actions. So indeed, the text clearly specifies the scope of work to be undertaken on the side of the fellow airport supports. But having said that, indeed, when we go one level of detail further, this is now up to the consortium to make a proposal as to what precise work would be undertaken at which operational environment and by which partner. Fellow airports have to be from different countries, each one. Yes, also the case there. All ports and all airports have to be from different member states or associated countries. That's a clear condition in the call. Fellow. Okay, I have explained the fellow. The size, we discussed that. In the 10T regulation, many ports are maritime and inland ports. Would involving one of these ports suffice to cover the code criteria on inland ports? There, I mentioned already, there is no strict definition for an inland port. Indeed, in the 10T regulation, also, there is no strict definition of an inland port. In the 10T maps and in other legislation, the inland waterways are clearly laid out. And along those waterways, ports are laid out. But once again, we're not in a position at this stage to specify a strict and specific definition of what is an inland port. As I mentioned earlier, this is a condition, nevertheless, in the text. And so the consortium should clearly indicate in the proposal which partner is undertaking which role, which port, in this case, would undertake the role of the lighthouse, which port would undertake the role of a fellow port, and which of these, either lighthouse or fellow, which of these is put forward or considered as an inland port. So I believe that should clarify based on what we can say on that. Could the infrastructure for onshore power supply for ships be funded under this call? Yes, indeed. So yes, let me rephrase. This is not to actually build the infrastructure. Okay, and there are other instruments also at the EU level on the Connecting Europe facility focusing on co-funding the side of the infrastructure rollout. Here we're in the space of research and innovation in Horizon 2020. So indeed, similar type of focus and eligibility applies there. What we say here is that indeed innovative solutions applied to the infrastructure components are within the scope, and that also then includes the final endpoint power supply, so onshore, let's say electricity for ships. So yes, that component is also there, but let me clarify, it is not actually to roll out and build an entire infrastructure. That's not to cover that cost. So I hope it's clear that we're looking at the innovation angle that is being funded here. Could the lighthouse be considered if 3 ports opt to go together to demonstrate different core activities? Again, I mean, the call text here clearly says there's one anchor, there's one lighthouse, and that is called a lighthouse for a purpose. It's a lighthouse partner, it's a lighthouse airport or lighthouse port to undertake, once again, the bulk of the activities and so on. The rest of the fellow or associated airports or ports are eligible and are invited to participate in this project. There's a budget allocated also for these fellow airports or ports. There's a maximum, which we discussed also, the 20%. So that also gives you an indication that all three are not of an equal, the different ports or airports are not of an equal size of partner, let's say, or size of activities to be undertaking. So they're not all at the same level. The lighthouse clearly has more responsibility and more activities to take on board. Now, are onshore, offshore wind generation and solar panels deployed in nearby ports eligible? Now, here the text talks about demonstrating on the production side, the production of clean energy and clean fuels, and how these are then stored or distributed or supplied all the way up to the point of use at the airport or the port. Now, there the topic also leaves a little bit of innovation and flexibility, let's say, for the consortium to put forward ideas on where and how this production could take place. In certain cases, it could actually take place on the site of the actual airport or the port, for example, electricity generation and so on, but not necessarily. It could also be in the vicinity or close by. So that is what is meant and what is referred to in the text. Let me also then say that there's another topic in the Green Deal call, which is also addressing wind generation and solar panels and onshore, offshore energy production. So please refer also to that other topic there and the text, because I suspect that some of the activities that possibly you have in mind are more suitable for the other call topic. Will the cost of purchasing, installing of EV charging stations going to be used for demonstration activities? Are these eligible? Now, as I mentioned earlier on the point of infrastructure, the point of this Horizon 2020 innovation action is not to fund the building and the placing on the ground of such infrastructures and charging stations. So, please review that and please put forward what you think could be demonstrated. If this is not a point that could be demonstrated, perhaps so EV charging stations, perhaps other activities could be put forward. This is something that needs to be considered by the consortium. Coming back to UAM, so urban air mobility, are in-city vertiports acceptable instead of regular airports? This is not really the intention of and the focus of this call. Here we talk about let's say traditional airports, so traditional airport hubs. So you know, a vertiport on top of a skyscraper, for example, or a helicopter pad there. That is not really what we have here. We're talking about the big hubs. This is where a large component of the emissions are being generated. This is where most of the traffic is there. These are the big interconnection points and hubs, and this is what is the focus of this topic there. In terms of whether UAM vehicles are within the scope, I mentioned that also. Indeed, some of the drones or some of the city air vehicles in the coming years that also can be accommodated and refueled in the traditional airports, they can also be in scope. But as we also then see here, that's only one rather smaller component to be addressed. Once again, looking at the end impact that we need to achieve in reducing the emissions, and we know where most of these are coming from. That covers also the next question on urban air mobility, flying taxis. Okay, I believe that covers also the next one on the vertical takeoff, the smart airports. Is it possible to fund infrastructure for the ports? That also has been answered. Let me once again specify that this is not to build, to construct the infrastructure. We're in the territory again of innovation, and so we're looking for innovation solutions to be put forward that also have the need to possibly see how the infrastructure will be adapted, how it could be reused, whether additional would need to be built, and so on. I mean, that needs to be part of what needs to be looked at, but certainly not to build a new pipeline of clean energy to be transferred from 50 kilometers away. If an airport holding company owns several airports in one region, do they count as one airport? And can all their airports participate as one? Now, here, once again, this is not about the governance and the shareholding structure of stakeholders, be it airport, port, or other stakeholders. Okay, this is or the holding structure, or how these groups are composed. This is about the operations which are on the ground and the need to reduce emissions at airports, also at ports, but the question here refers to airports. So indeed, if a holding company or a group holds 3 or 4 or operates in 3 or 4 airports, having one group participate in the project in that sense is not sufficient. Ideally, what we would like to have is different airports and different ports on the ground, and from different member states and different associated countries. So I hope this is clear. Okay, it is the different types and different airports and different ports that are within the scope of what the topic is looking to be addressed here. So so really the shareholding structure is not really a condition. Is EU funding to industry private at 70% as usually for innovation action H2020? Yes, the same co-funding rate applies for all H2020 calls, including the Green Deal call. So indeed, for innovation actions, it's 70%, and of course, 100% for non-private industry stakeholders, public institutions, and so on. Can the consortium be composed by companies active in the maritime and port industry activities without being a port in itself? Yes, absolutely. This is one example of certain stakeholders or certain actors that are also engaged, involved, situated, located, or working with a port or an airport. The question is also applicable for airports. So they can also participate. They don't necessarily have to be a port or an airport. Other examples listed in the text include research institutions or academia, consulting firms, or other stakeholders that could add, however, that could add value to the project. So indeed, when the proposals are submitted, the evaluators once again will assess on the three criteria: on excellence, implementation, and impact. What is the total value of the proposal? What each partner is bringing in terms of value? And there, indeed, we foresee that indeed consortia are quite diverse from different types of stakeholders, ports, airports, other stakeholders, academia we talked about, or other activities there, all of which together provide complementary expertise and competence in performing the activities that are laid out in the topic. With an extra fellow airport from a third country count as one of the three maximum fellow airports, or can this be extra plus one? Now, again, the text here, which I take also in front of me, clearly says one lighthouse and up to three fellow airports or ports to be part of, to be from different EU member states or associated countries. I'll try to find the text here. Yes, so all participating airports or ports must be from different EU member states and or associated countries. So indeed, any international cooperation with other partners or other airports or ports is on top of that. Is the development of novel high sensitivity sensors for air quality and water quality monitoring eligible for funding under this goal? Now, again, this is to apply technologies which are already available, see how this can be used to measure, monitor, analyze, and use these technologies to also propose solutions on how to measure, as I said, analyze and reduce at the end emissions on the side of air quality and water quality, also to measure that. I mentioned some examples there. Some EU satellite solutions can also be leveraged there. So please look at that on how best to implement use those technologies for the purpose of conducting the activities. Can we target also private operations like private jets and helicopters? Yes, these are other types of operations and air vehicles in this case, which operate in airports, in these hubs. So indeed, they can also be used to demonstrate the use of sustainable alternative fuels, for example, for these types of air vehicles. Yes, so they are within the scope. Now, TRL 6 demo of alternative fuels and energy production, which do require sizable investments. The line between what type of infrastructure investments are eligible and which are not is not very clear. Now, here again, the topic looks at innovation which is rather mature at this stage. We're not at TRL 0, 1, 2, 3. These are new solutions to be put forward on the basis of what has already been taking place in previous projects, in ongoing activities today as we speak. Several airports are performing a number of activities, are even showing and demonstrating an approach to green their operations and move into more sustainable modes of vehicles, for instance, on the ground and so on. So a lot of this has already been demonstrated and matured and is actually already in place. So what the call foresees to do is actually build on the existing R&I that has already been taking place, build on the existing practices which are already in place now, and build on the work that is already, as we speak, in the pipeline in these airports and ports. So we're taking all of that as a baseline. This topic foresees to overlay these activities on top and push forward the frontier. I believe it's clear. It's not, once again, to construct the infrastructure, because I see there the focus again on the infrastructure, is to leverage the infrastructure that's in place, analyze whether that is sufficient, or whether indeed other types of infrastructures would need to be constructed, how best to be used, the existing ones are optimized. It is that type of innovation activities that need to be assessed and demonstrate on the ground to see what are the benefits of all these solutions which are put in place. TRL 6, we can say it's on the higher side. On the other hand, it is not starting from 7 and above, it's from 6 and above. And also links to the previous question there, whether work from the research community is welcome. Yes, within TRL 6, yes, there is scope for research activity analysis to underpin all that, so that at the end of those projects, we can even push up the level of TRL. Can an additional port authority become a partner within the consortium without playing the role of the fellow port to support the demonstration activities? Yes. So let me read that a second time there. Can an additional port authority become a partner? Yes, absolutely. So let's say in the port, there are other stakeholders or other authorities which operate there. They're of course also eligible to participate in the consortium and have a role in the actions there and the demonstration activities. Now, clearly, these let's call it associated stakeholders or authorities there, they are not the port itself, but associated authorities or stakeholders there, possibly operating in the same vicinity. So, as a partner, such a partner would not be named a fellow port, but as another partner in the list of consortium members. How will the maximum 20% funding for the fellow ports be calculated? Is this the funding going directly to the follower port authorities or to the cluster organizations cooperating with the followers? And what about partners doing some work for the entire consortium? Again, I believe it's rather clear in the text. I will take the sentence once again. Sorry, 20%. So the text here says a maximum of 20% of the requested EU contribution should be for the fellow airports or port. So once again, the focus here is on the airport or the port. I guess that then already clarifies that it's not an associated stakeholder who is also operating in the vicinity of the port, or, for instance, a consulting firm that supports different ports and airports, or possibly other clients also. Once again, the 20% is for the actual port or for the airport. And of course, as I mentioned, 1 minus the 20%, there's another 80%, or up to 20%, which is available for the other partners. So, from that budget contribution, other partners and authorities could also participate in the projects. Call text mentions the need for 1 lighthouse and minimum 2 following airports. Is it a problem if 2 lighthouse airports? That's already, we talked about 1 lighthouse with 2 followers, or strictly 1 leading lighthouse. Yes, I mentioned the word anchor, and we used deliberately the word lighthouse because indeed we're looking for 1 leading lighthouse, airport or port. Would it be possible to include more than 3 fellow ports or airports in 1 consortium? No, this is not foreseen in the call. The condition is 1 plus up to 3 in the consortium. Again, I believe that already follows the other one. 3. Is there any comment on the size? Believe we covered that. Is it recommended to have some diversity in terms of size, or better to find this in terms of use? Thank you. Once again, so we foresee a combination of different types of sizes of ports or of airports to be present in the consortium, because different types of solutions would be more applicable in certain environments, a bit less in others, and there are specificities in smaller versus larger hubs. So indeed we're looking for, as the question indicated, a bit of diversity in terms of the size of hubs, but also for diversity for the other types of partners to be in the consortium. Regarding the distribution, no, that we've covered. A minimum followers. Is there a minimum followers? So let me say here that indeed the condition says if at most, indeed, at most 3 at most fellow airports or ports. So there's no minimum. However, yes, ideally to demonstrate that, of course, then at different scales, as we mentioned, based on the size. But if we read this sentence, it says further 3 fellow airports or ports that will be actively associated in helping to define their specificities in the more general approach and solutions, follow closely demonstration actions, and are committed to implement. So, and are committed generally is plural. So, so that means essentially that the plural has at least 2, and as the text says, a maximum 3. Again, distribution of Lighthouse and maximum 3. Yes, that is done. What shall be covered? What shall be covered by supply system onshore, offshore? I believe we addressed that already. Demonstration activities to demonstrate the production of clean energy, either onshore or offshore, could also be there. For instance, in area B for the green ports, the last bullet point talks about this master plan for green ports, and there are some examples there which indicate that indeed different types of supply of clean energy should be analyzed for ports, whether they should be provided through fixed infrastructure at the port or through mobile, through barges, for instance, or other means to bring the fuel to the port. There's scope for analysis to see what could be the best way to implement all that. So once again, on the supply side, let's call it here, on the production side, there's a bit of innovation and flexibility that can be seen on what is the best way to see how best we can provide these clean fuels to these hubs. Again, bear in mind that we need to maximize the impact of these solutions and reduce emissions as much as possible. So, is the presentation going to be available? Yes, absolutely. So this is public material. So and what is in the presentation is actually a high-level summary of what is in the actual call text. So all the elements are taken from the text itself. Let me also then remind you that the call text itself is superseding in that sense the slides, so it prevails and it has of course the legal base that needs to be there to support the call. So the call text is the one that you should refer to in the preparation of the proposals, and these slides are there only to highlight a number of elements and explain and clarify as much as possible. Another question here: is there an opportunity for smaller ports in remote areas to be lighthouse ports? These types of ports are frequent across Europe and often the most innovative when using renewable energy. Smaller ports in remote areas. Now, again, these ports are also eligible to participate in the consortia. Once again, what role they would undertake, whether they would be the leading of the lighthouse port in the project, which would undertake most of the activities and lead all that work. This is something that needs to be defined and specified in the consortium and agreed, of course, with all the partners. So again, there's no restriction to the size of the lighthouse leading port, similarly for the airport. Are there any specific key indicators the Commission want every proposal to measure? Now, this refers to the performance measuring that is included there in the call text, and indeed, this is something that we have put in place in order to make and measure the impact in a more concrete and practical way. The idea is that we have a bit of an idea before and after the innovative solutions are applied. So in that sense, we're looking for measuring the current performance of emissions in airports and ports with the level of activity which is there, and with a comparable level of activity 2 or 3 years down the line into the project, to then take another snapshot, another analysis of how have we progressed. Have we moved up from the baseline? Have we improved based on the solutions that have been demonstrated, and have we and therefore impact generated, emissions reduced? So it's a performance monitoring mechanism that is there in place, so that indeed we have a view of concretely what are we achieving as we move along during the course of the project, and once these solutions have been demonstrated and applied. I'm looking here at the text itself. It also says that as part of that assessment, the performance monitoring, there's a specific focus also on airport or port energy consumption. There's mention also of greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. So all these elements are within the scope of the monitoring mechanism that should be put forward as part of the projects. Will consideration be taken when evaluating selecting the winning applications, ensuring that the two selected projects are complementary, i.e. not covering the same size, type of port, or similar types of geographic size? As long as each proposal is within the scope of the work and within the conditions that are laid out in the call topic, each proposal will be assessed on that basis. So there will not be a cross comparison. For instance, in this project, the total traffic it's much less than the other project, so much more traffic on the other project, and therefore the other project would get a lower score. That is not the case. So each project is evaluated with, as I mentioned, with the 3 regular criteria which are in place for H2020: excellence, implementation, and impact on their own merit, the composition of the consortium, the types of activities, implementation, how this is rolled out, the commitments, what is all. So the usual evaluation for that proposal. A separate assessment is done for another proposal. So indeed, there is no cross marks or one versus the other, and certainly not with the types of size or geographic localization of these constituents to be made. The only condition which is there, and I mentioned it here, and first of all, let me clarify that ensuring that 2 selected projects, it may not be at, we have to see the types of proposals that are submitted. Once they're evaluated, which of those proposals achieve all the thresholds and therefore the high scores and could be eligible for funding. There's no guarantee that it could be 2 + 2. There could be 2 + 3, or there could be 1 plus. I mean, there could be that evaluation process is not fixed by any means, as we always do for Horizon Europe, for Horizon 2020, and we will continue to do that for Horizon Europe. The evaluation is completely independent and done on merit and based on the criteria that have been agreed. So that, and the only condition there, which is also in the text, is that in order to ensure a balanced portfolio, that we don't, for instance, have 4 or 5 only for airports and 0 for ports. In that case, we would look at the highest ranked proposals for each of the 2 areas and see whether indeed the highest ranked proposals the two highest ranked proposals at least could be funded from each area. So therefore, we have a more balanced portfolio of actions, both for green airports and for green ports. Now, a question on all of the expected impacts must be addressed. Now, the expected impacts, like any other call in Horizon 2020, they're there to indicate what are the expected impacts that the project and the consortium foresees to generate at the end of the project. So these impacts are expected as part of the work to be generated, but again, the emphasis here is as part of the work. The projects will contribute to achieving all these impacts, and it is not only one project that will achieve all the impacts to full 100%, and so on. So, and as we've seen already in research innovation, usually there's a cluster of projects, and I mentioned earlier the portfolio approach. There's a cluster of projects that jointly together, working on similar issues, push forward the boundary and collectively push forward in achieving impacts and reducing emissions. So again, it's all within the scope of what is the definition of expected impact. It's applied to all the Horizon 2020 calls. But indeed, I read the actual phrase here from the text, which says the project results are expected to contribute to all these elements. So indeed, yes, that also depends, of course, on the types of activities that are being agreed to be addressed. Not all the activities are mandatorily required to be addressed. Different permutations and different types of work could be performed. So on that side, different types of impact would be achieved. So once again, the impact here is on the side of contributing to the impact, but of course, this is a criterion for the evaluation impact. It has to be clearly laid out what the expected impact would be from each project, the contribution of that impact from each project. And that is a clear criterion for the evaluation. So please pay particular attention actually to that. This is a very important criterion to focus on impact. I'm trying. The question was if they are, of course. Yes. Yes, there's a question here which is not entirely clear. If the question refers to one partner or one would add others. Is that, yeah, I mean, please resend that question. Possibly it refers to that group or holding company of various ports or airports, and whether they could all then be considered as one. I mean, the clarification provided earlier is that indeed one airport is one airport, one port is one port. It doesn't really matter whether it's one stakeholder owning three, and the composition thereof. So we're looking at the activities on the ground. Another question here regarding a green airport. Multimodal connections require involvement of other parties such as railway authorities, public transport companies. In the consortium, is it expected that all three fellow airports also will involve the railway authorities, public transport as consortium partners, or is it sufficient that only the Lighthouse Airport does that? The scope of work, indeed, here the question is only about airports, but it applies also for the ports. The point on multimodality is that the demonstration activities and the work to be undertaken and the stakeholders to be present in these projects are quite diverse. And the title itself talks about airport support being multimodal hubs. So the title gives clear indication that the topics need to have a clear and visible component of multimodality. How to achieve that and how to demonstrate that and how to implement that through the project, clearly other stakeholders need to be involved. So now, whether it's a public transport or a bus company or a railway authority, again, to that level of detail and formation of the consortium is also, I mean, it is something that is open for for decision from the side of the applicants to form consortia which they think are most closely relevant to what is in the title, in the scope, and to achieve the impact in this topic. If a proposal is put forward with let's say one-sided type of stakeholders with not really diversity or not adequately addressing the point of multimodality, this will be put forward in evaluation and evaluated therefore. So indeed, I mean, to if I can be a little bit more open at this point, it is encouraged, in fact, and that's why the text clearly put forward the aspects of multimodality. It puts forward points on model shifts and model interconnections. These things have to be demonstrated as well. They're part of the scope of the project. So it's inevitable that partners also with competence and expertise to participate in this type of work are also included. So once again, from different modes of transport. Is there some distribution rule between the budgets in respect of vehicles and infrastructure? Are additional innovation services covered by the core? No, there is no indication of the budget distribution for the various activities within the project or budget distribution across the different partners within the project. The only conditions which are there's an indication of an estimated budget range for the project, which is 15 to 25 million euros. There's a cap of 20% budget for the fellow airports or ports. And for the rest, it is for the consortium to plan out the activities and at one level down, once again, define how to apportion the budget within the project, for which type of activities, for which time frame, for which work package. These are the types of details that need to be put forward in the consortium, and clearly there's no split here, vehicles or infrastructure that is there. Additional innovation services covered by the call. I'm not entirely clear of what is meant by that, but clearly the text specifies what is in the scope of the activities, and the bullet points there make reference to what is required, with the flexibility, of course, to decide to address the bullet points that are required. Okay, and now we're getting to the end of the questions. There's a question here to clarify whether these projects would be lighthouse projects, and whether the term there refers to having this as a lighthouse project containing various airports or harbors and so on. Is it that lighthouse is a project containing only tourism? Okay, let us clarify here that we are within the scope of the project. We're not here to define whether a project itself is a lighthouse or not. Once again, a bit more openly, we can say that indeed these will be important and landmark projects for Europe to demonstrate innovative solutions and make a big step forward in reducing emissions in the coming years, demonstrating also scalable solutions to be rolled out to various airports and ports across Europe in the coming years. So in view of the importance of these projects, in view of the importance of the budget which is dedicated for this topic, I recall this 100 million euros, we could all agree that indeed all these projects are also lighthouse projects. They are very significant projects which are aiming to revert immediate and significant impact, supporting the Green Deal, helping to achieve the climate targets in place for 2030, and as we move into 2050, longer term, but also helping with the recovery of Europe after the current health crisis. So these, once again, are very important projects, and in that case, we could baptize them as lighthouse projects. But the text here, the reference to Lighthouse, refers to what's happening within the project. And within the project, the consortia would have a number of partners. So a number of ports and airports would be there. And the Lighthouse airport or port would have a clear role in undertaking the majority of the activities, perform the bulk of the work, and really lead the work and be the anchor. That is the term there, which is referenced there. Let's call it Lighthouse, let's call it leader. Again, not necessarily the coordinator, but a leading airport or port that will come forward and lead most of these activities, which I think that has been clarified. Yes, yes, and of course here my colleague also clarified that in the question here. Let us also clarify the point that the proposals should clearly specify under which area they're being submitted, either under area A, green airports, or under area B, green ports. So a project with a mix of airports and ports and port authorities and airport stakeholders and urban air vehicles and barges is not within the scope of what is here, what we're trying to do here. So once again, airports are separate, and then ports is another area. And a final question I have here: is the budget for the Lighthouse Port Airport part of the budget dedicated to fellow ports airports? No, exactly, it's separate. Colleagues here confirm. Indeed, the condition is that 20% of the requested EU contribution should be for the fellow airports on ports. Now, the one minus that, so up to 80%, is the remaining EU contribution for these projects, and that 80% could then be apportioned towards the Lighthouse leading airport or port, but also to the rest of the stakeholders and partners in the project. Now, that then split at that level, the 80%, how much of that would be for the Lighthouse airport or port and how much for each of the other, that is something that needs to be put forward in the consortium proposal. Once again, I would say, because I see quite a lot of questions here on the budget, the budget it needs to be associated and reflected upon the activities to be undertaken by the different partners. So now, if a partner is undertaking the bulk of the activities and a lot of the activities there, is leading quite a lot of the work, clearly the budget contribution would be higher for that partner. On the other hand, if a partner is having more of a supporting role and a more, let's call it a lighter role in the project, a budget contribution would be much smaller in the space of the consortium. But again, there's no that level of detail of the budget is something that needs to be put forward in the proposals. Now, let me try to see if there are any further questions. Yes. Is there any idea of the size of the consortium? Again, the size of the consortium is not specified, and indeed, I mean, the size of the consortia will also depend on the needs and which are the partners in that consortia and what work will be undertaken in that consortia in those projects. There are projects. There are certain partners that have a very niche expertise. For instance, yes, they're within the scope to participate in the consortia, but clearly they would not undertake most of the activities. But nevertheless, if they're included, they could still add value to the project. So by no means there is no size for the consortia, and this is not something that is being evaluated. Whether it's 15 or 25 partners, this is not specified. And if I can compliment on that, really it is not the size and how many partners are in the consortium that is the important element here. The importance is to have, let's call it a team, a consortium with the relevant expertise and complementarities there, that is able to perform the work, apportion the work accordingly for different partners, all of these partners to work together in order to achieve maximum impact for these projects. That is the required thing at the end of the day. And it really doesn't matter whether that is being delivered from 5 partners or from 100 partners. And you can understand the implications of that in terms of budget appropriation across the different partners. Is it clear that proposals need to be specifically about green ports or green airports? Yes. So it's either proposals would fall either in the area of green airports or in the area of green ports. A question says, in a green airport proposal, can a seaport take place in the consortium as a partner, not as fellow, delivering complementary service? Would this possibly cause confusion, even if the Rover seaports clearly indicated? I'm taking a second to think about this, because I did mention earlier actually that that each proposal would have to clearly specify under which area it is being submitted, whether it's under green airports or green ports. Now, for the projects and the green airports, we sincerely expect, ideally, I mean, the constituents and the partners to be on the side of airports, and on the aviation side, and possibly some of the other modes of transport there, to be involved. Yes, other land-based stakeholders. So, I mean, reading through the question, I guess if there is some expertise, some competence, and some willingness and commitment to participate as a port in these types of projects, I mean, clearly that will be much more relevant and much more adding value to a proposal that is being submitted under Area B for green ports. I frankly cannot consider how that value could be more placed in a project under green airports than under green ports. So that's why I said also earlier that cross mix matching of one project with various airports and ports and so on, that is not the certainly not in the intention, and certainly it will reduce the value, and it would take, let's call it the seat of a partner with expertise in the place of another partner that could possibly add more value on that side. I mean, on the side of airports, there are clearly specific conditions there on jet fuel. I mean, there are clear references to jet fuel, clear references to, we mentioned earlier, air vehicles, on operations on the side of the terminal there. But these are solutions that we foresee to be demonstrated and replicated at the scale thereafter. So airports, solutions, demonstrations to be replicated and upscaled for airports implementation. On the other hand, port demonstrations and innovation solutions to be demonstrated in order that thereafter they're implemented in port. So immediate and the same type of implementation, the same stakeholder group and sector, if I can say. Now, yes. Let me then go through the list to see if there are any other questions. Q&A. Published. Okay. I don't see any further questions. I mean, we still have another 15 minutes. If you wish to ask anything else, please send that through. As I mentioned, the presentation will be available for everyone. The call text is public, so the work program, Horizon 2020 work program for the year 2020 is there also. All of that is available on the funding and tenders portal. So everything we have discussed today, you can also find on the website. In the portal there, of course, there is also the possibility to add any further questions or clarifications you may require in the course of the coming months. And if that is the case, then any submitted questions in writing will be also answered in writing and published also on the portal. I do believe that we try to provide as much clarification as possible today. I would really advise you to please carefully read through the text, through the conditions that are laid out, conditions which are common for both areas, conditions that are specific under each area, and please consider that if there is no further condition or specification or anything else imposed, for instance, on the size, then that is deliberately on purpose, because we also allow for consortia to develop and put forward ideas and form projects with a component of innovation and flexibility. There's also a choice, as I mentioned there, to be made on the exact type of work and content to be addressed as part of those buckets, I called it earlier, categories or bullet points to be addressed. So there is also there some choices to be made. You will also see that in the range of the budget, which is also in the call text, an indication of 15 to 25 million euros. That also, as I mentioned, gives a little bit of flexibility on the types and sizes of the projects and the types of partners to go there. As I speak, I believe maybe one or two is that you said, yes, I said one or two other questions. I can take them. Is there any possibility to use hydrogen as an input to new industrial processes, or is it dedicated in energy? Hydrogen also here is mentioned indeed in the call text, and in particular even references to green hydrogen. And so clearly, in terms of fulfilling the ambition, focus on the production, supply, and use of green hydrogen is clearly preferable to other types of forms of hydrogen, blue and gray. And so, and for the use case for hydrogen, transport applications are, of course, within the scope here, but also for other purposes, as it's also the case for other types of clean energy, other types of fuel, or even for electricity, for electromobility. So, I mean, the main focus here, and again, this area 5 is on sustainable and smart mobility. The focus is on the mobility side, but also in the topic here, there are elements on, let's say, on the energy side, buildings, on site facilities, and even other aspects, operations, and so on. So the use of hydrogen could be assessed and demonstrated towards vehicles, but also for other purposes. Industrial processes could be one of that, but which are then linked with the operations of airports and ports. There's a question on whether there's a brokerage event foreseen. I understand there's a brokerage event scheduled tomorrow morning, and so please look at the RNI Days website for the schedule for that. So for tomorrow, day 3, you will find opportunities to perform matchmaking activities, but then also out of the context of the RNI Days, of course, there are other opportunities, other brokerage events and other events organized even at national level by the national contact points. There are other events and other opportunities to network. So please really leverage all these opportunities that you may have to try to really forge strong partnerships that will deliver concrete value in these projects, and clearly identifying where the complementarities in terms of expertise, competence could be brought forward. So please leverage all the channels that you have available to forge the necessary consortia. Okay. Is there another question here? The code indicates TRL6, thus use of already developed technologies, but there is space to consider in addition technologies at lower TRL as future perspective. I mean, the text itself really puts a little bit of a floor for the types of actions that are being foreseen there, the TRL 6 or above. So so indeed it gives a bit of a range, indirectly a bit of a range from 6 upwards. Now if most of the activities are above 6 and there's one activity in 5, yes, I mean it's which is complementary to help develop and demonstrate the others, that is also within the scope. So and also this is a matter of demonstrating the kind of maturity and level of TRL which is being perceived and being proposed to be worked on the basis of from the proposer, from the consortium. So and this will be also then in turn be evaluated. So if the project project makes a proposal to say that these activities are clearly mature, they have been already validated and so on, so we moved up the scale, and therefore now we are reaching the higher levels from 6 and above. This perspective, this view will be assessed by the evaluators. So yes, there is a little bit of flexibility there, but again the activities there, as mentioned in the text, it says actions to perform large-scale, real-life, high TRL 6 or above demonstrations, really to give you the indication that indeed most of the activities and indeed what we're looking at after here is mature demonstration actions, high TRL, as I mentioned, in order that we thereafter proceed with higher scale rollout and implementation deployment across Europe for different types and sizes of airports and ports. Okay. Do we foresee a similar event when project ideas become more clear to the potential applicants? A similar event is not foreseen, and typically when we publish a call, we have an information day which is open to all applicants, to all potential applicants, and this is what we're hosting today. As I mentioned, the key anchors, again, to use the word, the number one anchor is the call text. It's publicly available. That is the driving, that is the prevailing text, and that's the legal base based on which the proposal should be submitted and based on which the evaluation will be performed. On top of that, we have all these slides now, this presentation, which is also there complementing and presenting an overview of the call text, the call topic again. On the funding and tenders portal, again, all the conditions are laid out, the entire text is there. There's a frequently asked questions section there of the portal. So indeed, the call is open and is now open as of yesterday, as of the 22nd, formally on the portal. It will be there open until the deadline of the call in January 21, on the 26th of January of 21. So in the course of this time, I would really provide the advice that you should please really look at what is required in the text. Once this has become clear, please proceed without any delay in seeking to form the consortium, laying out the work through the work packages and laying out the activities and preparing the proposal for submission. As I mentioned, this is a single stage call. This means it is not a two-stage. So there will not be 2 iterations for proposal submission. It's a one shot. So there's a bit less time, if you wish, than the second, than a 2-stage process. In the first stage, really, you have to work within that time frame. And as I mentioned, the deadline of January 21 is not really that far away. So please leverage, once again, all the channels available to forge relationships and prepare the consortia as best as possible. Okay. Answer. Let me also, which I see here on the top of the screen, inform you that this webinar or this session is actually being recorded. So one can also access that once it is over. I'm going through different tabs here to see if there are any other questions. I don't see. I think everything has been answered from what I see. The screen says that we have another 4 minutes in this virtual room. So please feel free for a last-minute question. Now it says 3 minutes. So if there's anything that has been unclear, I'm happy still to take any further questions. Other than that, as I mentioned, let me also say that please read very carefully the text, the code text, and all the information should be there. All the conditions are there. And as I mentioned, if there are still, in the course of the coming months until January, there's still something which is not clear, and you would wish to write formally another question to us, and our colleagues at INEA, who are responsible for the implementation of the call, please write that question, and we will answer that in the frequently asked questions section of the funding and tenders portal. Okay, I don't see any further questions. I do one last check here. Chat. No. Here. Okay. Nothing there. Right. Yes. Please. Yes. Okay, there's a last question here, which I see has just come in on the cost eligibility. There, as I mentioned earlier, here I see some components which are actually not within the scope of the budget and the intention of our EU budget contribution there. I see here examples of battery cost or production cost for the batteries. That is not part of the scope there. It's more to demonstrate, for instance, how these batteries or how electricity can be used for transport applications, but certainly not to build or construct or work on the electrochemistry of the batteries. That's not the funding of this scope. So there, I would say on the cost eligibility, once again, please refer to what is in the text, the conditions of the text, and the usual, as always, conditions and general annexes of Horizon 2020, as well as the eligibility conditions on the side of the cost and other conditions which are there in the course of development of the grant agreement. There also in the model grant agreement, there are clauses there specifying what costs could be supported by Horizon 2020 or not. So these regular clauses also apply here on this call. So please review that. Green hydrogen or gray hydrogen. The emphasis and the ambition is on green here, as you see that in the text. But we do give that as an example there. again, the impact of the proposal and of the project will be evaluated. The performance monitoring will be in place before and after. The expected impacts will be analyzed, as I mentioned, for the evaluation. So if all of that could be achieved, demonstrated through gray hydrogen as opposed to green hydrogen, this is something that needs to be put forward in the proposal and will be evaluated as such. But clearly, in order to achieve the ambition that we all have in front of us here for 25 already, 2030, and then 2050, short, medium, and long term, really we have to push up the bar and look at innovative solutions, look at new types of fuels, and new ways of how we can channel that for the use of mobility and transport, but also for other purposes. So one approach is to look backwards and optimize existing technologies, and one is to look forward at new types and for production and use of sustainable alternative fuels, new types of clean energy. Yes, one comment here that the brokerage event is scheduled tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Please, for those of you that are interested, please join that session. That would be a good opportunity to brokerage and partner with different partners. Right. Let me then also say thank you from my side. It's been a pleasure to present this call topic 5.1 under the area 5 of the Green Deal call on sustainable smart mobility. I'm really looking forward to how this call then develops in the coming months. I'm looking forward to excellent, implementable, and impactful ideas coming out from these projects, and of course to the results of these projects, because that is ultimately what is necessary at the end of the day to deliver to the ambition that we have here in place, to contribute to that ambition, and that we move forward from the point of innovation, research innovation, more into the point now of implementation, deployment, and rollout across the TEN-T, across Europe, and beyond. So thank you very much. Good luck with your preparations in shaping the proposals and finding the right partners. And all the best. Thank you very much.